Let's talk about the most important issue in foreign policy, which is what is the right principle to use when deciding to go to war with another country? Do you have such a principle?
Well, I think the best approach is to try and work out differences between nations when they're susceptible of being worked out. Nobody starts with the proposition that war is the preferred method. Quite the contrary, it should be the last resort. But there are times when, in defense of American interests and values, there's no choice. I think we've faced that very difficult decision many times in the past. It's never a pleasant or easy decision. But especially today, for example, when we see the threat of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological, it's something that very much on the minds of American policymakers.
This is what we'd like to know. What is the principle that you use to determine when we should go to war and when we should not?
Well, in the case of outright aggression, an attack on the United States or its treaty allies, that's clear. That's what happened on 9/11, and we responded by going after Taliban and Al-Qaeda. There are other circumstances where we're essentially forced into a wartime situation in defense of our allies. And there are times when threats emerge that are so dangerous, nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, where it's a legitimate act of self-defense to use force before we're attacked.
So it's like in the war with Iraq, they had not attacked us, right?
But they were a continuing threat to international peace and security. They were in the form of the Saddam Hussein regime. They had used chemical weapons against their own people. They had used chemical weapons against Iran. They had invaded Kuwait. And it was clear that once free of UN weapons inspectors, they would return to the pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. So I think in terms of bringing peace and security to the Middle East, that overthrowing Saddam, in a way, was finishing the business left unfinished by the first Persian Gulf War.
If a country has weapons of mass destruction and has abused its people and has attacked a neighbor, then we should go to war with that country?
Well, not necessarily even then. Well, I think it's a very complex equation. North Korea, for example, is the worst abuser of its own people probably in the world. It has nuclear weapons. It supports terrorism. It's a threat to its allies. But it has nuclear weapons, and it has large amounts of chemical weapons right near the border with Seoul, which is, as a city, has grown right up to the demilitarized zone. So this is a grave threat in its region, and I think worldwide, but it's not an appropriate place at this point to use force.
So in a case like North Korea, even though they do have weapons of mass destruction and they have abused their people and attacked their neighbor like they attack constantly, they attack South Korea, we should not go to war. So that really is not the principle. So if Iraq had really had nuclear bombs and deliverable nuclear bombs, then we should not have gone to war with them.
Well, I think it depends on the circumstances. If it had been possible to neutralize the weapons, that would be a different story. But to me, it's one reason why we have focused, or should focus, so intensively on stopping countries from getting weapons of mass destruction to begin with. Because
is that an incentive for all the countries to get weapons of mass destruction like North Korea has? Because once they have them, then they know we won't attack them.
Well, I think the incentive in this case comes from countries perceiving that the United States is not able to stop a country that's determined to get nuclear weapons like Iran from proceeding. So that's why this test case is so important. Every country that succeeds in getting, in particular, nuclear weapons is an incentive for other countries to do the same. So in the Middle East, if Iran gets nuclear weapons, almost certainly Saudi Arabia will get nuclear weapons, Egypt will get nuclear weapons, Turkey will get nuclear weapons, and perhaps others. It's
trying to get these nuclear weapons because they want to make sure that the United States cannot determine what they have to do, will not influence their foreign policy, and so they can exercise their national sovereignty. They know that if they have the nuclear weapons, we won't mess with them.
I don't think that's the main motivating factor. I think in the case of Iran, it has to do with their hegemonic aspirations within Islam. It has to do with their territorial aspirations for dominance in the Middle East. It has to do with their opposition to Israel. There are a lot of reasons, but one reason that's hard to argue with is that as each country in a particular region gets nuclear weapons, it provides a strong incentive for others to do otherwise. That's what proliferation is all about. That's why the failure to stop countries like North Korea and the impending failure to stop Iran is so dangerous.
So what is the principle? Because so far I'm not sure. Previously you had said that if they had weapons of mass destruction, had abused their people and attacked their neighbor, then we should go to war, but then there are exceptions. So that's not the principle. What's the principle?
I think it's very hard to have a 25-word or less answer to that, and I think that's why these decisions turn out to be so complicated.
There is no principle then.
Well, you know, I've written books on the subject, and you can't summarize it in a bumper sticker, and I don't plan to try.
Is there a principle that you could tell the viewers what it is so we can know when, say, like you almost ran for president, could have been the president, if you were making this decision, how would you make it? So we can know in advance that if this were the situation, these conditions are necessary and sufficient to go to war. I will go to war in this case, but not in the other case.
Okay. I tried before. I'll try one more time, then we'll call it quits. I think when the United States is attacked...
Yeah, well, I got that. We all agree with that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But when the United States is
or threatened to.
Or when it's faced with an imminent threat of attack,
absolutely.
Or it faces weapons of mass destruction, in the hands of countries, for example, like Iran that supplied terrorists.
Well, what about like North Korea?
That there are grounds for self-defense. And I think that the risks, the costs, the dangers of force are something very compelling that the United States has to take into account. This is not reducible to a very short formula. It's a matter of extraordinary importance and something that decision makers have to weigh very carefully. So, okay.
Another country.
I think really, honestly,
let me ask you another question.
I'll give you one more because you're asking the same question in different ways.
Well, if another country has harbored terrorists that have attacked us, should we go to war with them?
Well, I think we have, in the case of Afghanistan, for example, done just that, and I think we were justified in doing it.
So should we go to war with Pakistan? They also harbor terrorists that have attacked us.
And they have aided us as well. It's a very complicated country. As a friend of mine once said, it's the only country.
But we shouldn't go to war with Pakistan, right?
I don't think so at this point.
But they also have had the
and I've answered your question now several times. Okay, I've got to go.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for the interview. Very illuminating.